I didn't speak. I just sat there, hands folded over a linen handkerchief, as my stepson's laughter cut through the will reading like a blade. The gold-digging shrew finally gets her payday, he sneered, loud enough for every cousin, every aunt, every whispering parasite in the room to hear. After 2 decades of building a life with Franklin, after holding his hand while cancer hollowed him out, after burying the only man who ever saw me fully, this boy, born of entitlement and spite, tried to bury me too. But I didn't bury, I documented. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The afternoon light in Franklin LeClair's study fell through leaded glass windows in pale gold bars, stretching across the Persian rug that had absorbed decades of cigar smoke, secrets, and victories. The long mahogany table in the center was polished so cleanly that every reflection of crystal water glasses gleamed like cut diamonds. Silence filled the room first, thick, reverent silence, the kind that always precedes the opening of a will. Vivian sat at the head, as Franklin once had, hands folded neatly over a linen handkerchief. 68 years of practiced poise kept her back straight, her breathing steady, her expression as calm as if she were about to discuss art at a gallery opening. The faint scent of sandalwood lingered from Franklin's old humidor, a ghostly reminder that though he was gone, his presence still owned the space. Trent slouched 2 chairs away, legs sprawled like a man who mistook arrogance for confidence. His navy blazer was wrinkled, the collar of his shirt slightly askew, but he wore entitlement like armor. Greta, statuesque in a silk-sheath dress, perched beside him with a grace sharpened into something dangerous. Her red lacquered nails tapped against her glass stem, the rhythm steady, like she was counting down seconds to an inevitable scene. Miles Turner, the family's attorney, cleared his throat. His leather case was already open, papers arranged in the careful order Franklin had dictated before his death. He adjusted his glasses and began, his voice professional, low, but edged with a weight of importance. In the matter of Franklin LeClair's estate, the air shifted, bodies leaning forward, breaths tightening. A cousin scribbled notes, an uncle smoothed his tie. Vivian reached for her teacup, porcelain thin, lifting it with the same measured grace she had shown when handling priceless paintings at the museum. And then Trent laughed. Not a soft laugh, not even a nervous one. A sharp, deliberate bark of laughter that cracked across the room like a whip. He jabbed a thumb in Vivian's direction, his smirk curling like smoke. Let's not kid ourselves, Miles. We all know what this is. The gold-digging shrew finally gets her payday, right there in front of us. The words hung in the air, venom wrapped in mockery. Aunt Clara gasped, her hand flying to her pearls. A cousin muttered, "Jesus, Trent." Chairs shifted, a ripple of shock spreading as if everyone had felt the slap. Greta didn't gasp. She didn't even flinch. Instead, her lips curved, the faintest smirk of satisfaction. She tilted her head and studied Vivian like a hawk watches a rabbit. Interested only in the stillness before the pounce, Vivian did not pounce. Her teacup paused an inch from her lips, porcelain steady, hand unwavering. Her gaze slid toward Trent just once, long enough to acknowledge his presence, but not long enough to grant him victory. She set the cup back in its saucer with a soft, deliberate click, as if even the sound itself was a decision. Miles faltered, his mouth half open, papers trembling just slightly in his hands. He looked to Vivian, silently asking whether he should continue. She gave him a single nod, small, imperious. Enough. Trent leaned back, triumphant at first, scanning the room for allies. But the silence that met him wasn't the applause he sought. It was the cold, embarrassed quiet of relatives shifting in their seats, of people unwilling to catch the splash from another man's reckless arrogance. He stood abruptly, pushing back his chair so roughly it scraped across the rug. "Enjoy it while it lasts," he muttered, eyes flashing toward Vivian. Then he stormed from the room, footsteps echoing down the hall, the slam of the heavy oak door punctuating his exit. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint rattle of crystal on silver trays, unsettled by the force of his departure. Vivian breathed in once, slow and deliberate, and lifted her tea again. She drank, unhurried, as if nothing had happened, as if the insult hadn't sliced into her flesh, but instead had carved something cleaner, sharper, more resolute. The relatives whispered, confusion and curiosity buzzing at the edges of the room. Greta's smirk remained cool and quiet as she traced her fingertip around the rim of her glass. Miles cleared his throat again, fumbling back into the text of the will, though the words seemed smaller now, less significant than the rupture that had just torn through the family. Vivian finished her tea, placed the cup down gently, and folded her hands once more. The room thought it had witnessed humiliation, but only Vivian knew it had just witnessed the opening act. The study had emptied by dusk, leaving only the faint hum of the grandfather clock and the residue of whispered judgment lingering in the walls. Vivian lingered after the others had gone, her hands resting on the armrests of Franklin's leather chair. The smell of sandalwood had thinned now, replaced by the sharper tang of paper and ink. The scent of work that lay ahead. On the desk, Miles had left a thick manila folder with her name embossed across the tab. Vivian drew it closer, her fingertips steady though her pulse ticked faster. She did not tear it open at once. Instead, she traced the neat handwriting Franklin had insisted on even in death. Inside were ledgers, trust agreements, and Franklin's private notes in his precise fountain pen script. Columns of numbers filled page after page, sharp black ink detailing the machinery of wealth most heirs never bothered to understand. Vivian's gaze moved not with surprise, but with recognition. Franklin had not raised her to be ornamental. He had sharpened her like a curator cataloging masterpieces. Methodical, deliberate, patient. A small digital recorder was clipped to the inside flap. She pressed play. Franklin's voice filled the quiet, warm, but edged with steel. "If he ever disrespects you, open this." Vivian closed her eyes, the sound of her husband's voice tightening her throat for the first time all day. Not grief, no, that had already been mourned. This was permission. This was instruction. She picked up the phone and dialed without hesitation. When Eva answered, Vivian's tone was clear, almost ceremonial. "We're initiating Plan B." There was no pause on the other end. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Eva replied, her voice brisk, like a general summoned to battle. By the time Eva arrived, the air in the study had shifted again. The lamps burned lower, casting long shadows across Franklin's mahogany desk. Eva entered carrying a battered leather briefcase, her laptop tucked beneath her arm, and a stack of legal pads filled with her dense handwriting. At 71, she moved with the authority of someone who had stared down men who thought they could outwit the IRS. She spread her papers across the desk. "Show me what he left." Vivian slid the folder across. The two sisters leaned shoulder to shoulder, a quiet rhythm settling between them, their version of intimacy. Pages turned, pens scratched, numbers lined up like soldiers in formation. "Trustee discretion," Eva murmured, tapping clause 17 with her pen. "He gave you temporary control of the estate, 6 months, ironclad. Not advisory control, Vivian. Executive." Vivian's brows lifted slightly. "Temporary?" "Temporary is long enough," Eva said. "If Trent thought calling you names was the end of it, he just handed you the matchbox." Vivian sat back, the chandelier's glow catching the calm steel in her eyes. She had not raised her voice, had not so much as shifted her posture, but already the room felt charged with intent. Eva continued flipping through the ledgers, muttering shorthand notes to herself. "Deeds on the waterfront properties. Yours to freeze. Silent shares in his development company. Yours to redirect. And this," she pointed to a series of cash accounts under discretionary trustee control. 60% of the estate sits in your palm. He probably never read the clause past the first line. The weight of it settled like a cloak over Vivian's shoulders. For hours she had played the role of the humiliated widow, the quiet second wife mocked as a parasite. Now before her, the truth stretched wide. She was the axis on which the LeClaire fortune would turn. Vivian closed the folder gently, as if sealing a museum case. "Then we begin," she said. Eva leaned back, studying her sister's face. "You understand what happens when you light this fuse. There's no unstriking the match." Vivian reached for Franklin's recorder again, pressed her thumb against the cool metal, and listened once more to his voice. "If he ever disrespects you, open this." Her lips curved, not in joy, not in triumph, but in something colder, steadier. The house had gone still by morning, yet the weight of discovery lingered like perfume after a guest departs. Vivian sat at Franklin's desk once again, the manila folder spread before her. Clause 17 circled in Eva's precise handwriting. The words were stark on the page. In the event of unseemly conduct by heirs, the trustee retains executive discretion over all trust assets for a period not exceeding 6 months following the settler's death. Unseemly conduct. Franklin had always chosen his words with surgical intent. He hadn't written disrespect, abuse, or malice. He'd chosen a phrase broad enough to let discretion do its work. Vivian could almost hear his voice, the patient tone he used when teaching her how to read between the lines of contracts others skimmed. 6 months, Eva said, adjusting her glasses as she scrolled through spreadsheets on her laptop. That's long enough to clip him at the knees, maybe both knees. Vivian reached for her tea, the cup warm against her palm, grounding her. Franklin built this with care. I won't let Trent burn it out of vanity. Eva scribbled a note in the margin of her pad. Then we start with what he doesn't want anyone to see. His business. Stacks of bank statements and property records filled the desk by noon, Eva rifling through them with the steady hand of a career investigator. He's sloppy, she muttered. Big contracts, thin margins, too much cash flowing out with too little justification. Vivian watched her sister's pen dart across the page, circling red flags, consulting fees without invoices, inflated land valuations, offshore transfers masked as investor reimbursements. Every mark Eva made was another crack in Trent's facade of success. He has no idea what these ledgers actually reveal, Eva said. He's been coasting on borrowed credibility. Vivian leaned forward, her fingers brushing the edge of Clause 17 again. Then let's put his credibility on trial. Quietly, for now. By late afternoon, Vivian had Miles Turner back in the study. The attorney sat stiff-backed, his tie knotted too tight, his briefcase unopened at his feet. He had always been careful around her, respectful of Franklin's second wife, but cautious not to appear partial. Today, however, his restraint bordered on unease. You're asking for a forensic audit, Miles said carefully, hands folded on the desk. Of Trent's firm. Vivian did not flinch. I am not asking. I'm exercising authority Franklin gave me. Miles hesitated, adjusting his glasses, his gaze flicking to Eva and back. This will cause waves, you know that. Clause 17 doesn't care about waves, Eva cut in. It cares about conduct. Trent showed his hand yesterday. This is the consequence. The attorney's jaw tightened. For a moment, it looked as though he might resist. But then he exhaled, shoulders sagging under the inevitability of law. The clause is airtight, he admitted. Legally, I can't block you. I'll order the audit. Vivian nodded once, her posture regal, final. Good. Make it thorough. Every dollar, every shell company, every handshake deal. If his foundation is sand, I want it washed clean. When Miles had gone, Eva leaned back in her chair, closing her laptop with a decisive snap. You realize he'll be furious. Vivian's eyes softened, though not with pity, with clarity. Fury is not a strategy. It's an unraveling. You're aiming for the unraveling, Eva said, studying her sister. Vivian lifted the folder, sliding it back into the desk drawer. The click of the lock echoed through the study. I'm aiming for the lesson. Trent thinks inheritance is his birthright. He'll learn it can also be a mirror. Eva tilted her head, intrigued. A mirror? Vivian met her gaze, her voice measured, deliberate. One that shows him exactly who he is when the scaffolding falls away. The audit file was thicker than Vivian expected. Rows of numbers bled into each other, the kind of excess and omission only arrogance could produce. Trent had always been careless with rules, assuming someone else, usually Greta, would mop up behind him, but numbers never lied, and now those numbers had teeth. Vivian and Eva worked through the night, every ledger mark distilled into crisp summaries. By dawn, 2 neat packets sat on Franklin's desk, addressed in Vivian's tidy script. No name, no return address, only the weight of facts wrapped in silence. Vivian smoothed her palm over the envelopes. Truth doesn't need a signature, she murmured. Eva looked up from her laptop. You know they'll trace the leak. They'll try, Vivian replied, sliding the packets into a courier bag. But suspicion will find Trent faster than it will ever find me. 2 days later, the first spark landed. An investor, an older man with a reputation for meticulous records, filed a complaint with state regulators, attaching the financial irregularities Vivian had curated. By the end of the week, rumors threaded through Charleston's narrow business circles. Unpaid notes, delayed returns, whispered questions about whether the Leclerc heir was playing fast and loose with other people's money. At the same time, Vivian exercised Clause 17 again, freezing Trent's scheduled distributions from the trust. The notice was delivered formally by Miles's office, but its real sting came when Trent's assistant tried to wire payroll for his development firm and found the accounts locked. Eva chuckled when the call came in. He's going to be pounding on doors by morning. Vivian stirred her tea, unhurried. Let him pound. Doors don't open for fists. The confrontation came sooner than expected. The country club pool deck shimmered in late afternoon heat, the air thick with chlorine and gossip. Vivian sat beneath a striped umbrella, her white gloves folded neatly in her lap, the picture of composure. She had chosen this spot deliberately, where visibility meant protection, and whispers carried farther than shouts. Greta appeared like a storm front, silk scarf knotted at her throat, sunglasses shielding her eyes, heels clicking with precision. She didn't sit. She leaned down, close enough for the scent of her perfume, sharp gardenia, to slice through the humid air. Back off, Greta hissed, her smile fixed for the onlookers sipping cocktails a few chairs away. Vivian tilted her head, studying her daughter-in-law's mask. From what, dear? Don't play coy. Freezing his distributions, leaking nonsense to regulators. It won't end well for you. Vivian's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. I'm just exercising control, like Franklin taught me. Responsibility has a way of finding its rightful steward. Greta's jaw tightened, though the corners of her lips didn't move. The performance mattered too much. She straightened, smoothing her dress, and whispered, You're making enemies you can't outlive. Vivian picked up her iced tea, condensation cooling her fingertips. Enemies are just mirrors, Greta. They show us how right we are. For a fleeting moment, Greta's mask cracked. An exhale too sharp, a grip too tight on her handbag. Then she pivoted, walking away with the same grace she had arrived, heels echoing across the pool deck. Every head turned to follow her exit. Every whisper began with Vivian's name. Exactly as planned. By Sunday, the local paper ran a front-page story above the fold. Real estate royalty under review. The article stopped short of accusations, but its tone dripped with doubt. Anonymous investors questioning missed payments. Quiet regulators monitoring developments. Vivian clipped the page and folded it into her journal, a private record of balance being restored. Eva read over her shoulder. He'll see this as war. Vivian closed the journal with a soft thud, her gaze steady. He declared war when he called me a shrew. I'm just keeping the books honest. Charleston's humidity clung to the night like a wet sheet when Eva arrived again, this time with her briefcase bulging. She didn't wait for tea or small talk. She spread photocopies across the desk, the edges still warm from the courthouse printer. Vivian leaned in, her finger tracing the stamp in the corner. Sealed record, Family Court, 2007. Eva's eyes glittered. Not sealed enough. The language in the transcripts was blunt, ugly. Greta's previous husband had accused her of manipulation during their divorce, but buried within the testimony were the details Greta had worked hard to erase. Bruises photographed, police reports quietly withdrawn, allegations of nights locked out of her own home. It had been filed away, sealed under confidentiality, but Eva, with decades of IRS tenacity, had pried it loose. Vivian read silently, her face as unreadable as ever. She survived him, she murmured. She survived more than him, Eva corrected. She learned to build armor out of secrets, and Trent thinks she'll protect him the same way. Vivian set the papers aside with care, as though handling fragile glass. Armor can be turned into a blade. Later, while Eva continued combing through filings, Vivian opened another drawer Franklin had labeled Private Ledger. 2014. The handwriting was unmistakable, neat as calligraphy. Numbers lined the pages like soldiers. She paused when one entry stretched across half the line. $200,000. Settlement of gambling debt. TL. The notation was followed by Franklin's terse remark. Final warning. He will not change. Vivian ran her hand over the page. It was one thing to suspect recklessness. It was another to see the ink of her late husband's resignation. She felt not anger, but confirmation. The cold solidity of a truth finally unearthed. By noon the next day, a manila packet sat neatly prepared, assembled with the same precision Vivian had once used arranging museum exhibits. At the top, Greta's sealed divorce transcripts. Beneath them, Franklin's ledger page, his handwriting an undeniable witness. Vivian didn't send it to the press, not yet. She delivered it in person. She found Greta at the boutique she owned downtown, where glass shelves gleamed under bright lights and a soft jazz playlist tried to make indulgence sound respectable. Greta looked up from a conversation with a sales associate, her smile a practiced blade. Vivian handed her the packet without preamble. Read this at home, alone. Greta arched a brow. And if I don't? Vivian's voice was smooth, steady. Then the paper will read it for you. Greta's nails clicked against the envelope as she slid it halfway open, glimpsing the courthouse seal. Her face drained by degrees, though her smile remained fixed. You wouldn't dare. Vivian's reply was calm, almost tender. It's already scheduled for the press. For the first time since Franklin's death, Greta faltered. She closed the envelope, her breath shallow, the performance cracking. What do you want? Vivian's gaze didn't waver. Choice, walk away quietly or risk everything you've built. Decide quickly. Deadlines are cruel. Greta said nothing, only clutched the packet against her chest as if it were a wound. That evening, Miles Turner arrived at Vivian's house, summoned by Greta's frantic call. He placed his briefcase on the desk, his tone heavy with exasperation. Vivian, this is dangerous ground. Exposing sealed records, gambling debts. You'll scorch the earth for everyone. Vivian poured him a bourbon in Franklin's old glass and set it gently before him. Then let the earth burn cleaner. Trent humiliated me in Franklin's study. This is not vengeance, Miles. It's stewardship. The estate cannot survive under his rot. Miles rubbed his temples, weary. I advise mediation. Settle. Contain the damage. Vivian's lips curved faintly. Containment is mercy. He was not merciful. Eva, seated nearby, added dryly, mediation only works when both sides have leverage. He's running out of it. Miles stared at them both, then downed the bourbon in one swallow. He didn't argue further. He only closed his briefcase with a sharp click, as if sealing his own complicity. The IRS confirmation arrived in a plain envelope, the kind that could carry either a tax refund or a reckoning. Vivian slid it open with Franklin's silver letter opener, her hand steady, her pulse unhurried. Inside was the language of exposure, suspicious activity reports, cross-border transfers flagged from Charleston to the Cayman Islands. Dates, amounts, red arrows, Trent's name, repeated with ruthless clarity. Eva peered over her shoulder, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. He thought offshore meant invisible. She gave a low whistle. Amateur hour. Vivian slid the papers back into the envelope. Invisible until light finds it. By late afternoon, the envelope had been thinned. Vivian had chosen a handful of details, enough to raise questions, not enough to show her full hand, and slid them into another anonymous packet. This one she delivered to a journalist at the Charleston Financial Ledger, a reporter with a reputation for smelling smoke, even when others swore there was no fire. The man never saw Vivian's face. He found the envelope tucked under his windshield wiper, sealed with nothing but tape. Inside, transfers, dates, and the scent of scandal. Within 48 hours, whispers of a LeClaire offshore account spread across campus at Franklin's alma mater. The university, sensitive to bad press after recent scandals, moved swiftly. Trent's name vanished from the alumni donor board, replaced with a bland press release. We thank Mr. LeClaire for his past contributions and wish him well in his private endeavors. Eva laughed when she read it aloud. That's ivory tower language for scrubbed clean. Vivian only nodded, her expression calm. Legacy is fragile when it relies on marble plaques. The blowback spread quickly. Charleston's social set had long admired Greta's boutique, her curated shelves of imported fabrics and polished handbags. But clients who lunched together also gossiped together, and gossip was poison to retail. By the end of the week, Greta's numbers slid, 35% down, receipts slashed by hesitation. The air in the boutique shifted from the crisp confidence of luxury to the stale scent of desperation. Greta tried longer hours, flash promotions, charm at the register. But suspicion was louder than sales. On Thursday evening, Vivian's phone rang. She recognized the number immediately. "Trent," she said, her tone even. There was no greeting on his end, just breath, ragged, angry. "What the hell is your endgame, Vivian? You freeze my accounts, you poison investors, you smear Greta's store, and now, Cayman Islands, you're cutting me off at the knees." Vivian's eyes softened, but her voice remained measured. "No, Trent. I'm showing you what your knees look like without scaffolding. You've leaned on Franklin, on Greta, on reputation. This is the mirror. You're destroying me." His voice cracked, raw with a mix of fury and something smaller, more wounded. Vivian let the silence stretch, long enough for him to hear his own desperation. Then she answered, slow and deliberate. "Redemption, Trent. Yours or mine." For a moment, he said nothing. The static on the line filled the space, heavy, almost pleading. Then the call disconnected. Vivian set the phone down and looked toward the darkened garden outside. The camellias Franklin had planted bloomed white under the moonlight, unbothered by scandal, untouched by greed. Eva, seated nearby with her laptop, shut it softly. "He's slipping faster than even I thought." Vivian poured herself a glass of water, the ice clinking gently. Slipping isn't the end. It's the beginning of the fall. The conference room at the downtown bank tower had been chosen for its neutrality. Mahogany table, leather chairs, a view of Charleston Harbor glittering under the late morning sun. But the neutrality ended the moment Vivian entered. She moved to the head of the table without hesitation, setting Franklin's old fountain pen neatly in front of her like a gavel. The LeClaire family trust board was already assembling. Cousins, aunts, and distant relations filled the seats, whispering behind their agendas. The hum of small talk snapped off when Trent walked in. He was early. That alone unsettled them. His blazer hung unevenly, his jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes bloodshot from nights without sleep. He dropped into a seat opposite Vivian, his movements sharp, jerky, stripped of his usual arrogance. Greta trailed him, immaculate as always, but the tightness in her smile betrayed strain. She adjusted his tie for him before sitting, her hand lingering a moment too long as though steadying a man about to crumble. Vivian acknowledged him with nothing more than a nod. Miles Turner, seated to her right, cleared his throat. The meeting of the LeClaire Family Trust will come to order. Vivian's voice followed, calm but unmistakably in command. First order of business, presentation of findings. Eva rose from her seat at the far end, a thick folder in her hands. Her blunt efficiency filled the room. Without flourish, she slid glossy photographs across the table, each one face down until they reached Trent. He flipped the first one, and the color drained from his face. The photos were grainy, but clear enough. Trent seated at a blackjack table in the back room of a Charleston dive, the men around him familiar to anyone who read police blotters. Known gambling associates, men who had lost fortunes and freedom. The sequence showed him exchanging cash, shaking hands, laughing too easily. The relatives murmured, some leaning in, others recoiling as if proximity itself carried contagion. Trent slammed a hand down on the table. "This is garbage. Staged. You can't prove." Eva's voice cut him off, sharp as a blade. "Dates, locations, witnesses. It's corroborated. And you know it." Greta shifted in her seat, her lips barely moving as she leaned toward Trent. "We're bleeding," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the photographs. Vivian didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply uncapped Franklin's pen and drew a line across her notes. Next item, vote on removal of Mr. Trent LeClaire's management authority over 3 trust properties, specifically the waterfront lots, the townhouse development, and the family's country acreage. Trent shot upright, his chair scraping back. "You can't." Vivian's gaze held his, unyielding. "Clause 17 says I can. Conduct unbecoming of an heir justifies discretionary action. This is not personal, Trent. It is governance." The board members shifted, eyes flicking between Vivian's serenity and Trent's unraveling. Miles cleared his throat again, voice carrying the weight of procedure. All in favor of the motion to reassign authority. Hands rose slowly, one after another, until the room was nearly unanimous. The only abstentions came from relatives too cowed to choose. Trent's fists clenched, knuckles white. Greta reached for his arm, but he shook her off. Miles scanned the table. "Any objections?" The silence was heavy, suffocating. Not one voice answered. Vivian tapped her pen once against the tabletop, then set it down. Motion carried. The room exhaled. A collective recognition that a line had been crossed. Not by Vivian, but by Trent, who now sat stripped of the illusion of control. He stared across the table, his jaw tight, his breathing ragged. "You think this ends with paperwork?" he muttered, low enough that only Vivian could hear. Her reply was calm, even tender in its cruelty. "Paperwork is where legacies live and die." The boardroom battle had left an aftertaste of victory, but Vivian knew the war was far from finished. Trent was unraveling, and unraveling men often dragged others down with them. Still, there were debts deeper than offshore accounts or bad investments. Debts he thought silence could erase. Eva found it first, a thin stack of records, half buried in arbitration filings from years earlier. She dropped them on Franklin's desk, like evidence at trial. "Child support orders," Eva said, her voice clipped. Arbitration sealed most of it, but not enough. He buried her under paperwork and walked away. Vivian opened the file. The handwriting on the mother's affidavit wavered, slanted, uneven. Desperation bled through every line. "She asked for nothing extravagant," Vivian murmured, "just enough to keep the child steady. And he gave her nothing." The meeting with the woman took place in a diner on the outskirts of town, the kind with cracked vinyl booths, and a waitress who never let the coffee run dry. Vivian arrived in her cream suit, an image of composure, while the young mother sat hunched in the corner, shoulders drawn tight. dark circles beneath her eyes. Her son, maybe 12 now, waited at the counter with a soda, swinging his legs off the stool. "I wasn't sure you'd come," the woman said, her voice trembling. Vivian slid into the booth. "I keep appointments." The woman pushed the court orders across the table. "He promised payments after arbitration. Nothing ever came. My lawyer stopped returning calls once the bills dried up. I can't fight someone with that kind of money." Vivian placed a hand on the papers, steady. "You shouldn't have had to." The woman's eyes brimmed, but she blinked them clear. "I don't want his money anymore. I just want him out of our lives. But the debt follows me. It poisons everything." Vivian's tone was measured, resolute. "Then we cleanse it." By the following week, a new lawyer stood at the woman's side, retained by Vivian herself. Filing fees, back legal costs, arrears, all quietly covered. Vivian moved funds with the precision Franklin had once admired, turning financial clauses into instruments of mercy. When the first notice of enforcement landed at Trent's office, the shockwaves rippled quickly. He had ignored regulators and investors, but a family court order was different. It carried the weight of shame that investors might overlook, but Charleston society would not. The second blow landed almost as quickly. At the next HOA meeting of the upscale development where Trent's company had long been a preferred vendor, the board voted, quietly, unanimously, to remove his firm from the list. Too much scandal, too much liability. His crews would no longer pave driveways, repair gates, or build decks in neighborhoods where whispers traveled faster than golf carts. Vivian received the update in a brief email. She read it over tea and passed it wordlessly to Eva, who smirked. He's being exiled from his own backyard. That night, Greta confronted Trent in their kitchen. The boutique's slump had become a freefall, and now the HOA blacklist carved deeper into their finances. She slammed the refrigerator door shut, her voice slicing through the silence. "We are done cleaning up after you." Trent spun toward her, face flushed. "You think this is all me? She's orchestrating. Vivian is poisoning everything." Greta cut him off with a bitter laugh. "She doesn't have to poison anything. You did this yourself, and I'm finished pretending otherwise." At the same hour across town, Vivian and Eva sat in Franklin's study. The mother's court orders now lay in the locked drawer with the gambling debts, the offshore accounts, the sealed divorce records. A gallery of sins curated into evidence. Eva tapped the folder. "This one's different. People forgive money. They don't forgive abandoning blood." Vivian's gaze was steady, her voice a low verdict. Some debts live longer than silence. The study had become a vault of sins. Gambling debts, sealed divorces, abandoned children. But Vivian understood the most devastating cut was not financial. It was erasure. Charleston thrived on names engraved into plaques, whispered across gala tables, etched into the marble of donor halls. For years, Trent had basked in that borrowed glow, signing checks Franklin had funded, attaching the LeClaire name to scholarships and banquets as if they were proof of worth. Now, Vivian held the power to sever that illusion. It began quietly, letters drafted on thick paper, her signature flowing in Franklin's old Mont Blanc ink, each one addressed to the boards Trent sat on: arts councils, hospital auxiliaries, historical societies. The language was polite but firm. Effective immediately, his name was withdrawn from service. Miles Turner delivered the first batch personally, slipping them into the hands of startled administrators. Some resisted, but Mr. LeClaire has been a patron for years, until Miles pointed to Clause 17, ironclad and merciless. Within a week, invitations stopped arriving for Trent. Committee rosters replaced his name with silence. His seat at charity dinners sat empty, the name card quietly discarded before the first toast. Then came the foundation. The LeClaire Family Foundation had been Franklin's pride, a structure meant to outlast him. But the name had become a gilded shroud for Trent's ego. One crisp morning, Vivian convened the board, her board now, and announced the change. "The foundation will henceforth be known as the Franklin Trust for Ethics," she said. her voice carrying across the oak-paneled room. Gasps fluttered, but no objections followed. Even Greta, sitting stiff in the corner, didn't rise to challenge it. She only pressed her lips together, her silence speaking volumes. Eva leaned over, whispering low enough for only Vivian to hear. "He's being erased in real time." Vivian's gaze remained fixed on the board members. "No, he's writing it himself." The final blow came from the art. Franklin's private collection had hung in the estate for decades. Oil landscapes, modern abstracts, delicate sculptures. Trent had always spoken of it as a trophy, pieces to leverage for loans or flaunt at cocktail parties. But Franklin's true intent had been preservation, education, a bridge between beauty and integrity. So Vivian arranged the donation to Franklin's alma mater, a small university with a struggling art department. The condition was ironclad. The pieces would be displayed under the Franklin Trust, with no mention of Trent or the broader LeClaire line. At the unveiling, students and faculty crowded into the gallery, their faces illuminated by the glow of paintings that had never been seen outside the estate. The president of the university praised the gift as an act of profound generosity and vision. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled. Trent was nowhere in the room. 2 days later, the student newspaper ran an op-ed from a senior art history major. The headline stretched bold across the page. The piece praised Vivian's decision, condemning Trent's scandals, urging classmates to see integrity as the true inheritance. Copies of the paper spilled across the campus lawn, carried by students to coffee shops and dorm rooms. The words spread faster than any official statement could. Eva slid the clipping across the study desk. "He's not just losing control, Vivian. He's losing his name." Vivian traced the headline with one finger, her expression unreadable. A name is only as strong as the spine behind it. That evening, Greta returned home late, the boutique half empty of customers, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion. She found Trent in the den, a half-empty bottle of bourbon sweating on the table beside him. The student paper lay crumpled at his feet, its headline glaring. "They're erasing me," Trent said, voice raw, eyes glassy. "She's erasing me." Greta didn't argue. She only sank into the chair across from him, her silence no longer an act of loyalty, but of surrender. The courthouse smelled of old paper and polished wood, a place where names were either vindicated or dismantled in public view. Reporters lined the steps outside, cameras flashing each time the heavy doors creaked open. Inside, the probate courtroom was packed, family on one side, curious locals on the other, notebooks ready to carry gossip into Charleston's drawing rooms. Vivian entered in a navy suit, understated but commanding, her silver hair swept back in a chignon. Ava walked beside her with a slim leather folder tucked under her arm, eyes sharp, scanning for weaknesses. Miles trailed behind, his briefcase swinging like ballast. Across the aisle, Trent sat hunched beside his attorney. His face bore the map of sleepless nights, jaw unshaven, eyes bloodshot, suit ill-fitted as though borrowed from a better past. Greta sat a seat behind him, her posture immaculate, but her gaze distant, as if she were already planning her exit. The gavel cracked, and the room hushed. Trent's lawyer rose first, a tall man with a booming voice meant to intimidate. He painted Vivian as a manipulator, a widow who had wormed her way into Franklin's affections and now wielded power she was never meant to hold. "She is exploiting technicalities," he thundered, gesturing toward her. "Clause 17 is nothing more than a loophole, a shield twisted into a sword. Mr. LeClaire is the rightful heir, and this court must see through her machinations." Vivian sat silent, her hands folded in her lap. She did not blink, did not lean forward, did not feed the theater. To the gallery she seemed almost detached, but Eva, seated close, recognized the steel in her stillness. Then Miles rose. He moved slower, his voice measured, precise. He held a single sheet of paper aloft. "Clause 17 is not a loophole," he said. his voice resonant in the hushed courtroom. It is Franklin Leclerc's handwritten directive, executed with full legal capacity and witnessed accordingly. His words are plain. He handed the page to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. The judge read aloud, each syllable slicing through the charged silence. If any heir humiliates my wife publicly, they forfeit immediate control and distributions for a period of 6 months, subject to trustee discretion. The words fell like stones. Heads turned toward Trent. The memory of his outburst at the will reading still hung in the air, carried on whispers through Charleston's parlors. Gold-digging Shrew, he had called her. Now, the insult was codified as his undoing. Trent shifted in his chair, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles whitened. Eva stood next, her folder opening with the crisp snap of practiced authority. She laid out the financial misconduct like a surgeon exposing infection. Cayman accounts, unpaid investors, gambling debts, child support arrears. Each page landed with quiet devastation. "This is not stewardship," she said flatly. "It is exploitation." And Franklin Leclerc anticipated it. The judge listened, expression unreadable, but the weight of evidence tilted the room. The gallery murmured, notes scribbled feverishly. Trent's attorney sputtered objections, but the tide had shifted. After a long silence, the judge removed his glasses and set them on the bench. His voice carried the finality of a hammer strike. The will is upheld in full. Clause 17 is clear. Trustee discretion remains with Mrs. Leclerc. This court sees no reason to disturb the decedent's intent. The gavel struck once more. Trent shot to his feet, his chair clattering back. "You can't do this. This is my family's name, my father's work. She's nothing but—" Greta's hand caught his sleeve. "Sit down," she whispered, not out of loyalty but embarrassment, her eyes darting to the reporters scribbling every word. Vivian stood, calm, unhurried. She didn't so much as glance at Trent as she walked past, her heels clicking softly on the worn floorboards. To the gallery, it looked like grace. To Trent, it felt like abandonment. The probate ruling echoed through Charleston like a church bell, final, impossible to ignore. By the week's end, Greta's boutique had shuttered. The glossy window displays that once glittered with imported silk now stood bare, the glass plastered with a stark white sign, closed until further notice. In truth, there would be no notice. The shelves inside were stripped, mannequins draped in dust cloths, like corpses in a forgotten morgue. Greta filed for separation days later. The paperwork was clinical, no drama, no pleas for reconciliation. She signed with a steady hand, her once perfect signature crisp and unemotional. To society, it looked like pragmatism. To Trent, it felt like betrayal. His house came next. Once the crown jewel of the Leclerc developments, a sprawling waterfront estate with a veranda facing the harbor, it appeared on the market quietly, the listing discreet. But the price was a whisper of its worth, undercut and desperate, as though the house itself wanted to escape him. Vivian saw the listing in the paper while drinking her morning tea. She circled it once with Franklin's fountain pen and said nothing. By afternoon, an anonymous trust had placed a cash offer. Within days, the property was hers, though no one would trace the deed back to her name. Eva raised a brow when the papers arrived. "You bought his house?" "That's surgical." Vivian didn't answer immediately. She set the documents aside, studied the view of Franklin's garden, and finally replied, "Not surgical, corrective." When the sale closed, Vivian prepared a second set of papers, this time transferring the deed to a different name entirely. She met the mother of Trent's child in the same diner where they had first spoken. The woman's hands trembled as she opened the manila envelope. This is the deed," she whispered, scanning the legal jargon, tears welling as realization dawned. Vivian nodded once. "The home is yours, not as charity, as repayment." The woman covered her mouth with both hands, shoulders shaking. At the counter, her boy stared wide-eyed, his soda forgotten, his legs still swinging. Eva, who had accompanied Vivian, watched the scene with arms crossed. "That's stone cold," she murmured under her breath. Vivian's reply was steady, unsentimental. "That's justice." Meanwhile, Trent wandered rooms that no longer belonged to him, boxing up remnants of a life he couldn't afford to keep. He drank from chip tumblers instead of crystal now, stared at bare walls where art once hung. Greta had taken only her clothes and the car. She hadn't looked back. Neighbors noticed the moving truck. And they noticed something else too, the HOA newsletter. It arrived folded neatly in every mailbox, printed in polite, neutral language. Effective immediately, LeClaire Development Services is removed from the list of approved vendors due to ongoing legal and reputational concerns. The phrasing was courteous, but the subtext screamed exile. In Charleston, HOA approval was oxygen. Without it, contracts dried up, referrals vanished, and whispers became knives. Trent had not only lost his house, he had lost his standing in the neighborhoods his company once paved, landscaped, and maintained. At the estate, Vivian clipped the newsletter and slid it into her journal, another artifact in her curated archive of retribution. Ava leaned against the desk, arms folded. "He's bleeding from every direction. You've gutted his business, stripped his boards, hollowed out his home, and now you've handed his house to the one woman he wronged most. What's left?" Vivian closed the journal softly, the lock clicking shut. Reflection. Eva arched a brow. Reflection. Vivian's gaze was calm, distant. When everything is taken away, what remains is truth. And truth is always the cruelest inheritance. The knock at the front door had been slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. By the time Vivian opened it, Trent stood beneath the porch light, his shoulders sagging beneath a wrinkled blazer, hair unkempt, eyes rimmed with red. "Please," he muttered, his voice rough, the swagger gone. Vivian didn't move aside immediately. She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to let a ghost cross the threshold. Then she turned and walked toward the kitchen. He followed like a man entering confession. The kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and lemon polish. Vivian moved with her usual poise, pulling 2 porcelain cups from the cabinet. She poured coffee into both. Black, no cream offered. Trent sat at the table, his hands pressed flat against the wood as though bracing for impact. "I need a loan," he blurted, unable to dress the words in dignity. Just enough to steady things, get the firm breathing again. Vivian set a cup in front of him. The steam rose between them, but she did not sit. "The firm doesn't need breath, Trent. It needs a burial." His jaw tightened. "You've stripped everything from me. I have nothing left. You win, all right? But at least give me a chance to rebuild." Vivian finally lowered herself into the chair across from him, her posture perfect, hands folded neatly around her cup. "You mistake me," she said softly. "This isn't about winning. This is about truth." For the first time, Trent's composure cracked completely. He lowered his head into his hands, shoulders trembling. The room filled with the uneven sound of a man who had never allowed himself to weep in front of others. Vivian didn't flinch. She didn't comfort. She watched, silent, the way a curator observes a fragile artifact finally showing its fractures. When he lifted his head again, his eyes glistened. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "I don't know how to be without all of it." Vivian reached into the drawer beside her, pulled out a sealed envelope edged with Franklin's familiar handwriting, and slid it across the table. Trent stared at it. "What's this?" "Your father's final letter," Vivian said. Her voice was calm, stripped of malice. Not money, not property, words. He wanted you to have them when this day came. Trent hesitated, then picked up the envelope, running his thumb across the seal as if it burned. Vivian's eyes met his. "Your redemption is your own to fund. Not mine, not Franklin's. If you want a new life, you'll pay for it with discipline. Not inheritance." The silence stretched. Trent clutched the envelope like a lifeline, but his gaze avoided hers. Finally, he pushed back his chair. The scrape of wood against tile echoed louder than his broken voice. I don't know if I can, he admitted. Vivian lifted her cup, sipping calmly. That is the first honest thing you've said in years. He lingered for a moment, as if expecting her to call him back, to offer a last reprieve, but her expression remained serene, unyielding. He left the kitchen, the front door closing with a muted thud. From the kitchen window, Eva watched him stumble down the front walk, the sealed envelope clutched in his hand. His figure passed beneath the glow of the iron gate lamp, shrinking against the darkness of the street beyond. He looks like a man walking without bones, Eva murmured. Vivian rinsed her cup, her movements steady, controlled. Bones can break, but a spine, that he'll have to build for himself. Spring rain slicked the cobblestones outside Franklin's study, drops tapping the window like a patient metronome. Vivian sat at the desk, ledger drawers open, Eva beside her with a fresh pot of coffee. They had combed through every file, every note, every clause, but it was Franklin himself who had left the final surprise. Eva slid a yellow deed across the desk, her fingertip tapping the embossed seal. You see this date? 4 months before he passed. He transferred the lake house back into his sole name, not the trust, not Trent's. Vivian leaned closer, her breath catching. The house had always been Trent's trump card. A sprawling retreat by the water, bragged about in interviews, showcased in glossy magazines. He had claimed it as proof of his father's belief in him. Yet here was the truth, in Franklin's elegant script. Title reverted, clear of encumbrance. He cut him out himself, Eva said quietly. Vivian traced Franklin's signature with her fingertip. The ink was firm, no hesitation. It wasn't spite, it was foresight. The sale was done quietly, a discreet listing, a private buyer. The transaction wrapped in layers of anonymity. Within weeks, funds flowed not into Vivian's accounts, but into a new endowment, the Renewal Scholarship for women rebuilding after betrayal. At the press announcement, Vivian stood behind the podium in a charcoal suit, Franklin's Mont Blanc pen clipped to her folder like a talisman. The audience was small but attentive. Journalists, faculty from the university, a handful of donors curious about her next move. This is not charity, Vivian said, her voice even, deliberate. This is investment. Betrayal steals more than trust. It steals footing. This scholarship restores it. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled. Somewhere in the crowd, a student clutched her notebook to her chest, eyes shining with hope. And miles away, Trent opened the paper to see the announcement, realizing the lake house he'd once called his sanctuary now funded the futures of women his arrogance had never considered. It was Greta who came next, slipping through the estate's side entrance on a rainy afternoon. She looked different, her hair unstyled, her face bare, the gloss of society peeled away. Vivian met her in the conservatory, where orchids bloomed in muted pinks. The two women stood among the flowers, silence stretching like a taut string. Greta finally spoke, her voice quieter than Vivian had ever heard it. We could start over. You and I. Trent is finished. But I could help you carry the foundation, the boards, the... Vivian cut her off with a slight tilt of her head. No, Greta. Greta's eyes flickered, searching. Why not? We want the same thing, control. Vivian's tone was soft but immovable. Control isn't the same as stewardship. You want the mask, not the work. I won't trade one parasite for another. Greta's jaw clenched, but she said nothing more. She turned sharply, her heels echoing against the marble, leaving the conservatory filled only with the steady drip of rain against glass. When the final estate paperwork was ready, Miles arrived with his briefcase, heavier than usual. He set the stack of files on the desk and exhaled. It's over, he said, his voice carrying both relief and exhaustion. Vivian signed the final page with Franklin's pen, the ink flowing smooth and unbroken. She closed the folder and handed it back to him, her face unreadable. Not over, she said softly. balanced. Miles studied her for a long moment, then nodded. He knew better than to argue. That evening, Eva returned with a small wrapped parcel. She set it on Vivian's lap as they sat together in the study. Vivian unwrapped it slowly, revealing a framed piece of calligraphy. The words were stark, bold, impossible to misinterpret. Let them choke on underestimation. Vivian stared at it for a long while, the corners of her mouth curving, not in glee but in recognition. She set the frame on Franklin's desk, where the light from the lamp illuminated it, like scripture. The ballroom smelled faintly of waxed floors and lilies, the air thick with the low hum of Charleston's elite gathering to be seen. Chandeliers cast their golden light on rows of white-clothed tables, crystal glasses catching sparks of brilliance. At the front, a podium waited, polished, expectant, bathed in a spotlight. Vivian hadn't planned to speak. She had come as custodian, not orator, prepared to let the press release carry the message. But when the dean of the business school stepped aside and gestured toward her with deference, the room stilled in anticipation. Ava, seated near the front, raised her brows as if to say, "Now it begins." Vivian rose. Every eye tracked her, a current of curiosity, resentment, and awe colliding in the silence. She walked with measured steps to the podium, Franklin's Mont Blanc pen clipped neatly against her folder, her armor disguised as elegance. Her voice, when it came, was calm, deliberate. "Legacy," she began, "is a word we use too easily. We treat it like marble, permanent, untouchable. But marble crumbles under pressure, under neglect, under arrogance. True legacy is not marble. It is conduct. It is the choices we etch in others' memory." A murmur rippled. Some leaned forward, others stiffened, sensing the undercurrent. "I stand here not because I sought power," she continued, her eyes sweeping the room, "but because power was placed in my hands with conditions. One condition in particular, that I would not allow humiliation to stand as inheritance." Heads turned toward the back rows, where Trent was conspicuously absent, his scandals already the stuff of whispered legend. Vivian let the silence sharpen the implication before continuing. "Franklin LeClaire built with discipline, with patience, with an understanding that fortune means little without integrity. My stewardship of his trust has not been about preservation. It has been about alignment, to align his name and mine with the values he lived, not the failures that threatened to tarnish them." The applause began softly, scattered, then built into something heavier, purposeful. Vivian waited, composed, allowing it to crest before lifting her hand slightly, guiding the room back into silence. "I am proud to announce the creation of the LeClaire Integrity Chair in Business Ethics, endowed here, at Franklin's alma mater. It will stand as a reminder that wealth without accountability is rot, and influence without responsibility is poison." The donors in the room exchanged hushed words, some impressed, others unsettled. The chair was not a statue, not a building. It was an ideal given permanence, a judgment dressed as a gift. From the back of the room, a figure caught Vivian's eye. Greta. She sat half-shadowed, her silk dress muted, mascara smudged at the corners of her eyes. For once there was no smirk, no performance, just raw, unvarnished grief. Or perhaps recognition. She lifted a hand as though to applaud, but let it fall into her lap, unnoticed by anyone but Vivian. Vivian did not falter. She looked past her, letting Greta's presence become another ghost in a room full of watchers. When Vivian concluded, she closed her folder with a soft click and stepped back from the podium. The applause came harder this time, echoing against the chandeliered ceiling, but Vivian didn't smile, didn't bow. She accepted it as one might accept rain, inevitable, passing. Eva was the first to stand, clapping with steady, unflinching pride. Others followed, some out of conviction, some out of obligation. The sound swelled, but Vivian turned before it reached its peak. She descended the steps, moving toward the side exit, heels silent on the polished floor. She didn't linger to shake hands or receive congratulations. Power didn't need validation, it needed direction. The study was quiet again, as it had been the morning after Franklin's death. The rain had dried, leaving the garden luminous under the Charleston sun. Vivian stood before the old oak cabinet Franklin had once kept locked, its brass handle worn smooth by decades of use. She slid the final file into place, the last of the documents, the last of the transfers, the last clause enacted. The drawer shut with a solid click, a sound that echoed like punctuation at the end of a sentence. She rested her hand on the wood for a moment, feeling the weight of it, an archive of rot and restitution, a record that would not be opened again. Behind her, Eva lingered in the doorway, 2 glasses of sweet tea in hand. "Come on," she said, her tone less command than invitation. "The garden's better company than paperwork." They sat together beneath the wide arms of the magnolia tree, the air thick with the perfume of its blossoms. The iron gate gleamed in the distance, harmless now. Vivian took the glass, condensation cooling her fingers, and sipped slowly. The sweetness didn't feel indulgent. It felt earned. The sisters didn't speak at first. The silence between them was easy, companionable, punctuated only by the cicadas tuning themselves in the late afternoon. For months they had filled silence with strategy, with numbers, with whispered verdicts. Now quiet was enough. From the veranda, the new portrait looked back at them through the parlor window. Where once Franklin's stern likeness had presided, a fresh canvas now hung. Vivian and Eva seated at the garden table, flanked not by heirs but by the first recipients of the renewal scholarship. Young women, their smiles hesitant but hopeful, their posture upright, carrying dignity as inheritance. It was not a family bloodline, it was a chosen one. And it was stronger. Later, Vivian returned to the study alone. She opened her leather-bound journal, its pages thick with notes and clippings, fragments of the war she had waged with elegance and precision. She wrote in her steady script, closed, balanced, paid in full. She let the ink dry before shutting the cover, as though sealing an account that would never again need reconciling. Eva joined her again as the sun dipped low, its orange wash flooding the room. She leaned against the doorway, arms folded, studying her sister not with scrutiny, but with admiration edged in curiosity. "Would you do it again?" she asked. Vivian didn't look up right away. She closed the journal, set it carefully on Franklin's desk, and only then turned. Her expression was serene, touched by neither regret nor glee. "Not twice," she said. A pause, deliberate, but not once less. Eva smiled faintly, as if that answer had been waiting for years. That evening, the house filled with golden lamplight. Vivian moved through the rooms slowly, her steps unhurried, her reflection caught in mirrors that no longer distorted her as second wife or widow, but as the rightful keeper of balance. She paused in the living room, gazing again at the portrait. Her fingers brushed the frame, and she whispered, almost to herself, "Franklin, it's finished." Outside, the cicadas quieted, and the garden settled into twilight. The house did not feel haunted anymore. It felt whole. Vivian sat once more with Eva, both women silhouetted against the glow of the veranda. Their glasses clinked softly, a ritual not of celebration, but of completion. The ledger was closed, the accounts reconciled. The insult answered. At my husband's will reading, my son called me a gold-digging shrew, so I made him earn every penny back in blood and paper.